Hi friends, you don't see me on camera often, at least not on here. Just thought I'd talk about some things that I think are important as an artist. I want to say first, these are my opinion, most of them. Excuse me. And I'm an oil painter, so all of these things don't work for all mediums. Most of these things hold true for oil painters. And again, a lot of them are my opinion, and you may disagree. I've been painting full-time for probably at least 14 years. Prior to that, I did a lot of different things, folk art, and when it was a thing. So I've been working really hard at it for a long time, painting almost daily. I'm very prolific. I've worked really hard at it. I mean, I've tried really hard to learn, had lessons, and I've traveled several different places in the country for workshops, some good teachers, and it's tough. It's still tough for me. You know, you have those wonderful days where, you know, it just kind of paints itself, and then you have a day where, God, it's like you can't paint, and you wipe it off, and it's just so challenging. So don't beat yourself up, especially if you're new to this. It's always hard, I think. I mean, I don't know if there's any artists that sit down and every time they produce good work. I doubt it. I don't think so. I don't know of any. There are people that think they do, and I find in my experience a lot of those are not good artists. But that's fine. They're happy, and they're happy with what they're doing. So let me go over some things. These are not in any specific order, but some things maybe to think about. First and foremost is drawing skills. So important, so important. You're not going to be able to produce a good painting unless you draw well, unless maybe you're a landscape painter and you only paint trees and fields. But if that's your thing, I would get out there and do that from life and learn that way. You can, different ways to work. Of course, if you're a watercolor artist, they do a very precise sketch. And you can, even with oils, use a pencil or charcoal or paint and do a very precise sketch. A lot of times you'll see, if you follow me, I don't do much of a sketch. I believe you can draw with paint. But again, if your drawing skills aren't good and you are drawing with paint, when you adjust and adjust and adjust, a lot of times you end up with, you know, muddy colors. I find you can kind of clean it up at the end, but still, good drawing skills, so important. You just can't, you know, do that enough. Again, these are no specific order. Next thing is composition. So important. If you have a bad composition, it's going to be a bad painting, in my opinion. If you have spent a lot of time sketching it on, and I did this earlier in my career, and then you step back and the sketch isn't great, don't paint it. Just don't waste your time. It's not going to be a good painting. I remember several years ago seeing, it's a portrait painter here about where I live. He's so good. He's a really well-known, good artist. But he had done this portrait, beautifully painted of this young woman, but he had pushed her face closer to the side of the canvas. And in my opinion, I like breathing space. If I'm going to have negative space more on one side than the other, it's going to be in front of the face. So it looked awkward. You know, as nice as it was painted, the composition, I noticed it immediately. It felt awkward. So compositions, super important. Squint, if that's not something you do. If you squint, they say squint for value, open up for color, I think is the saying, but try it if you haven't been a person that does that. It takes out a lot of the little details and you can see value better. And value is just the lightness and darkness of a color. If you're new to painting and you hear the term, a lot of these terms can be confusing. It's just the lightness and darkness of a color. And there's a saying that value tells the story and color gets the glory. So value is more important than color. To get the correct value, get those darks dark enough and the lights light enough, you can, and you can try this out. I've done workshops where we've done these kind of things. You can use like any color if it's a correct value. You're painting a landscape, you got a distant hill, you want it to recede. Generally they're cool, they're cooler and softer, but something to try. I mean, try to get that correct value and see if it still recedes. Step back often from your work. I showed this last night. Let me grab this again. I can't say I always step back enough. I showed this last night. This is a reducing glass. Maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't. Looks like a magnifying glass. See? And it's called a reducing glass. That may be backwards. That's probably backwards. But what it does is, without getting up, when you look through it, it makes your image smaller. Well, let's see if it works on this. Yeah, that's how it works. So, a tool for you might consider, especially maybe you're a person that can't get up and down and you sit to paint, and you know, not all of us are real flexible and can get up and down. But back away, the more the better. That's why if you can stand and paint, standing is better in my opinion, because you can step back more often. And when you stand to paint, a lot of times you paint more with your shoulder, which is something they recommend, that you're not painting with your wrist, you're working more with your whole shoulder. I think it's easier when you stand. You need to learn about edges. Edges are very important in a painting. You have to decide where you want the eye to go and what your focal point is. Hard edges come forward. Most of the edges can be soft in your painting. That may not be your style. You may think everything should be hard edged, and the trouble is, if you do say you do a still life and you've got 5 things in it, if everything in it is detailed to death and hard edged, your eye just jumps all over the canvas. That's not the way you see. When you look at something, you focus on something, that is generally, well, what will pull your eye in is sometimes light and dark value next to each other. Might be the brightest color. Everything else is gray in the painting. Might be the most detailed thing, or again, hard edges. Edges, we're talking about edges. So try to practice that and learn that. Again, if you make everything hard edged in your painting, your eye it will just jump all over the painting. It won't be a good painting. Simple thing, one thing to think about. Again, I'm an oil painter, so I paint dark to light, thin to thick, large to small. Those are the things I do. I generally paint thin darks, that's how I'll start, and my darks tend to be transparent. And then when you get to the end is when you lay on the thicker color. So dark to light, thin to thick, and large to small. So block in with large shapes and work yourself to smaller shapes and detail. And don't put white on your canvas early. If you like to tone your canvas and you make the mistake of mixing up something with a little white in it and put that all over your canvas, you will never get nice rich darks. Everything you put on that canvas will mix into that white. I've seen people do that. So hold off with the white as long as you can. And white lightens, and white makes things chalky too. So you got to be careful with white. Again, I said I work dark to light, thin to thick, large to small. Such an important thing is values too. Learn about values. I mean, again, it's a simple thing. It's lightness and darkness of color. But they're very important. There are formulas that people believe you should use, like a certain percentage of one value, less of another, and a little sprinkling of the third value. And it can be it can be primarily mid-value you're painting with less darks and small touches of light. And it can reverse that, but that's a theory I've heard over and over. My favorite paintings are dramatic paintings with nice big shifts of value, nice deep darks and nice lights. I'm sure you've seen still lifes like that. They're very dramatic. I think they're exciting. So, but learn values. Make sure you, And it can be challenging, but get those darks dark enough and those lights light enough. Sometimes with oil, you've got to come back to where you're not working wet into wet and let things dry a little bit. There's so many ways to work with every medium, watercolor, pastel, oils, of course, acrylic. There's so many ways to work with all of them, and it's so fun. So find out, if you're new to painting and your interest is oils, I would start with oils. Don't feel like, and I've heard people say that to me, they start with acrylic and they feel like they need to learn how, and then they'll go to oils. Go with oils right off. I mean, I've done both. I've done acrylics, I've played with watercolors and gouache and pastels, and my love is oils. I did primarily do acrylics for a couple years, and I did some pretty still lifes and stuff. They're trickier. They're trickier to learn, how to get nice soft edges, and there are different kinds of acrylics too. I'll just throw that out there. There's golden opens, which are a slower drying acrylic. There's an interactive acrylic that you wet and they re-wet. So there's lots of options with acrylic too. You could do a watercolor wash and do pastel on top of it. So again, so many ways. Oil painters, lots of different, some people work months on a painting. They work in layers, they let it dry, and they keep working in transparent layers. I don't like that. I'm quick and fast and furious. If you watch me, I generally, complete a painting hour and a half, hour. I like wet into wet. That doesn't mean I won't go back sometimes. If I'm not happy with it, I will go back to it, of course. But I like the feel of wet into wet and what you can get when you put that wet oil on, on a wet painting. But that's me. So again, learn values. I've said that quote to you, that value tells the story and color gets the glory. So people don't always understand how important values are. Learn color mixing. I've talked about this before. If you're going to start painting and you aren't, start with a limited palette. A warm and cool of blue, yellow, and red and white. I really have never gone much beyond that. If you watch me, I do transparent red and Indian yellow in addition. But you can mix wonderful colors with that very limited palette. A lot of people like tube greens, and I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying, especially if you're new to painting, start with the limited palette and then see if you feel the need to add more and more colors to your palette. I like mixing up all my own greens. I don't use a tube green. So learn to mix color, learn to draw, learn about composition, edges, values. Again, I mentioned that the darks generally are transparent. They're very nice if you keep them transparent. The darkest darks that I use is the ultramarine and the transparent red oxide. It's a very nice dark, and it's a transparent dark. Just a couple more things I want to mention. Brushes. They have long handled, short handled, lots of kinds of brushes. My favorite right now are Rosemary and Company, and I like long handled brushes, and I like the ones I like long flats, but they're long for a reason. I tell myself over and over, I try to paint across it like that, and I try to stay at the end of the brush, but they make them long for a reason. The reason being is, if you're working at the end of that brush, you're back further from your painting. A lot of times you're using your shoulder to paint, which is really what's recommended, but take advantage of that length. You will see me tighten up for some tiny detail, but we're not, we're painting, and painting's your whole arm, and you're not drawing. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Another is, if you don't use palette knife at all, I generally get it out at some point. I definitely use it for color mixing. That's my favorite little one right there. But it can add some real exciting texture. When you learn to paint, it becomes about the brush strokes that you lay down become very exciting and important. I mean, there's, what is it? The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Something like that, another saying. But it becomes about laying down paint and how you lay it down. Palette knife is a fun tool. If you haven't used it, practice with it. I did a workshop where this gentleman, he would pick up his paint and then he would actually wipe it off to the exact length that he needed and go in and lay it there. He was very particular with his palette knife. But I find it great fun. I mean, it really, you know, you can do whole paintings, of course, with it, but it's very exciting. One more thing, let's see, is that it? I know there's lots and lots more. Please ask me any questions if you have any questions in the comments section. Anything you'd like to add to help somebody else. That I did this list very quickly, so if there's something else, and I'm sure there is, that I have missed, please feel free to comment that for the people that come along. So, you know, we're all here to help each other. We all learn from each other. Everything you know, you learn from somebody else or a book or a DVD, or that's how it works. You know, you're not stealing. We're all learning from each other, and I'm really happy to do that. I mean, anything I can share, any value that I can be to you, I'm happy to do that. So please ask me questions. Like and subscribe if you haven't. We get to 1,000, which we're getting there. I'm going to give away a painting. So, all right, I hope this was helpful. Again, I'm sure I missed a lot of things, so maybe we'll do it again sometime when I think of more stuff. All right, you have a wonderful day and come back.